So the title is Basic Methods for Evaluation of Myocardial Ischemic Stress with special regard to bioimpedance spectroscopy. What different methods do we have up to now to evaluate myocardial ischemia? This is either by morphology, by energetics, by myocardial pH measurements, nuclear magnetic resonance, enzyme loss, and post-ischemic function, as well as post-ischemic metabolism. But now we have one more, and that is bioimpedance spectroscopy. To give an example, these are data from different morphologies, data from different ATP evaluations, data from pH measurements, data from enzyme loss from Norway, and finally our data on post-ischemic function, compared adults with pediatrics under clinical circumstances. But what is bioimpedance? Bioimpedance is the object-specific, frequency-dependent, alternating current resistance. And it is described either by the real part or the imaginary part, by magnitude or by the phase angle. Please do not be a little bit puzzled. I will lead you very slowly through some of these parameters. The first is, I have chosen a schematic electrical diagram of myocardial tissue. And if we use an alternating current at low frequencies, then the current runs only through the extracellular space. And that is the so-called ohm resistance. How can we prove this? Well, very easily. If we measure the ohm resistance at low frequencies, here you see at the beginning, after 25 minutes of ischemia, and after 2 hours or 200 minutes of ischemia, there is a big change of the real resistance. And what happens now if we change the frequency of the alternating current? Then the current runs only through the intracellular part of the myocardium. It crosses membranes, and therefore we call it a capacitive resistance. And again, how to prove? Very easily. Again, the same time schedule, 25 minutes and 200 minutes, and you see at very high, higher frequencies, the change of resistance is obvious. And now this is the total schematic electrical diagram, what happens if we use myocardial tissue and we put an alternating current through this tissue to the ischemic tissue. And what do we need? At first, we need a special probe, and this probe has 4 electrodes, gold plating electrodes, and the outer ones inject the current into the myocardium, while the inner ones, the measuring electrodes, measure the voltage change during ischemia. And all the data come together into the impedance analyzer, and the impedance analyzer shows us the imaginary, the capacitive resistance, and the real part, the ohm resistance. And from these 2 parameters, we can measure, we can calculate the phase angle. And what is the phase angle? The phase angle is the arcus tangent of the imaginary part divided by the real part. So these are the theoretical aspects. Now, We have studied it with canine hearts, adult hearts, cross-clamp on the left side, and HDK solution, that is custodiol, on the other side. And you see, at first, the difference, we have only a short initial plateau in the pure ischemic group, while we have a very long initial plateau phase in the HDK group, but in both groups, the phase angle and both resistances change in both different extents until they reach an upper plateau. And now the question, right, if we compare this at 25 degrees, pure ischemia versus HDK solution, and you see it is the same. On principle, the same course, but a big difference in phase angle and the change of the phase angle. And the question is it true for human myocardium as well? Yes. We have only one case in which we took a specimen of a septum in a case of a hypertrophic obstructive cardiomyopathy, and then we took this specimen, put the probe on it, and you see it is on principle the same. We have an initial plateau phase, and it increases until it reaches an upper plateau. This is the problem. And now, what does it mean due to the viability? We are sure that the initial plateau phase, the lower plateau phase, that is a phase in which the myocardium is completely reversible. But if the phase angle has reached the upper plateau, we are sure that these hearts are irreversibly damaged. And in between, it depends on the method, the cardioplegic method applied. The critical, we call it the critical range of reanimation, and in this area, depending on the method applied, as already mentioned, there is the critical limit for myocardial resuscitation. And now, we have started to measure what happens with the neonatal heart. And this is for the first time, honestly, in the world that I present these data. You see, we have done our experiments at the moment on neonatal piglets hearts, aged 5 days old, 3 to 5 days. You see these small heart on the left. Then you see the probe, which is placed on the epicardial side in the middle, and you see the 4 electrodes being mentioned before. And the 5-cent coin is in Romania equivalent to the 10-ban coin. This is almost the same. You see, very, very small. So, what happens now? If our first experiments have been performed at normothermia, and we looked for 4-hour ischemia. And it is obvious there is a difference between the neonatal and the adult heart. Some of these points, these measuring points, are significantly different. It is obvious that a plateau phase, a lower plateau phase, is missing in the neonatal group. The neonatal group immediately starts to change under ischemic conditions, starts to change the phase angle. And finally, we can calculate the extracellular space index, and this index indicates the edema formation in the neonatal heart. And this is the worldwide accepted parameter to calculate. And we have done this, and here on the right side you see the difference, At 4 hours, it's normothermic ischemia. The edema in the neonatal group starts to develop very early. And this is the reason why it often, under very complex cases, prevents the primary closure of the thorax. The edema is the problem in the neonatal group. And here is the time course for 5 hours. You see, the extracorporeal space index is the same in the neonatal and the adult group. But the neonatal group develops an edema by far faster. And at the end, after 5 hours, they reach the same value. Finally, by these impedance measurements, we are able, and this is again for the first time, we are able to determine the closure of gap junctions. Oh no, sorry, before I missed what? Morphology. Now you may argue, or you may ask, morphology, what is it true what you do, what you are measuring? And here you see morphology. 0 immediately after having harvested the neonatal heart, this is one case, after 3 hours and after 22 hours. And it is obvious the area of the light areas increase. And what have we done? We have simply colored these areas. And here you see the light areas are colored red, and then we calculated the percentage of these slides. And when we calculate this and compared this with the extracellular space index, the following happens. The data shown before are represented by this curve. These are, and the light blue and orange curve are the extracellular space indices from adult and neonatal heart. And it is obvious that if you compare adult and neonatal heart, the water content, we call it water content, and the extracellular space index being calculated or being measured by bioimpedance measurements are almost the same. And finally, coming back to the gap junctions. And here, it is very interesting, by a special parameter, the so-called dielectricity constant, you can measure the gap junctions. And it is obvious that the gap junctions in neonatal heart starts to close about less than an hour earlier than in the adult heart. And if the upper plateau of the gaps, this has been reached, that means all gap junctions are closed. And if you compare this with the adult group, again, about an hour earlier, the gap junctions are totally closed. The therapeutical and the clinical relevance is at the moment still unclear, but we will see and we will continue our measurements. And now I finally will give you the take-home message. The electrical bioimpedance spectroscopy allows a fast and easily applicable characterization of tissues. Bioimpedance measurements are performed atraumatically and continuously. Determination of the phase angle allows a conclusion to be drawn about myocardial viability. Myocardial gap junctions are closed by far later in ischemic adult hearts than in neonatal ones. Neonatal hearts earlier develop an edema during ischemia, and analysis of impedance measurements directly correlate with morphological changes. I thank you very much for your attention.